Here's your union update for this week. Today is Monday, July 13th. I'm your host and chapter president, Jana Blunt. Quick note before we start, it's looking like we're going to need to take a break from providing a slideshow with the information, just due to time constraints. I'll still upload to YouTube, and linked timestamps for each topic will still be available in the description section, so you can skip to what you need the most, and then skip past stuff you already know. That's not going to change. I'm just examining these methods and others, and it's going to be valuable to get your input, especially if you feel anything in particular is just too valuable to lose. Just as importantly, if you feel any specific pieces of my efforts aren't especially useful, it'd be great to know that too. I appreciate that. So our news this week, it's going to include a couple of brief reminders, the status of our workforce, which is going to include letting you know what the union's been up to, and then a big piece on the county management talks, which will include our lobby reopenings to the public, an existing proposal update, and our newest questions for county management that we just submitted. Next, I'll do the safety concerns we're seeing and what we'll all need to do together to get what we want. It's going to be very easy, but I will need your help. Lastly, I will rebrief you on our upcoming events. Join us every Wednesday at noon at the county-wide Zoom lunch meeting. Invitations will come weekly via email, and the event is listed in our Facebook group as well. As always, you can subscribe to this channel and even activate new video notifications if you don't want to miss any of my updates. Other resources are still available to you. Direct email updates, our private Facebook group, and our shared Google Drive. Links for each of these are still in the video description, as always. All right, so I covered this in the last video after having already done so a few months before that, but I wanted to bring this up again for a reason. So just to rebrief, if you're at a higher risk of complication due to any pre-existing health conditions, if you're unable to work with a facial covering due to a health reason, if you have a health-related reason that you're experiencing overall difficulty working in your office, as before, get a note from your doctor ordering you to telework. And if you happen to work at Human Services Department, don't forget to use their special form. There's nothing wrong with it. I brought this up a third time because a couple of members have faced resistance from their supervisor or their manager upon turning in a doctor's note. So this is unacceptable. It's important that you know that. When a doctor puts into writing that you need some sort of physical accommodation, and this would include telework or some other environmental adjustment, the responsibility lies on your management to make this work for you. This isn't about being difficult. This is just something that happens in every department at different times. So if they're not making this work for you, contact us immediately if you encounter this or any other kind of resistance. The problems are being solved upon union involvement, so don't be afraid to pick up the phone or shoot an email, text, any of those things. So I was unable to provide you with a video update for last week, namely due to being tied up in all that was going on. Your union leadership had a hell of a time in these past 2 weeks. So we've got more to cover than usual. Let's get through these one at a time. Again, we're going to go over the recent union happenings, what the union's been up to, county management talks, which will include the reopenings of most lobbies, status on our existing proposals, and then newest questions we've got for the county, information with safety, specifically employee cases of COVID-19, and then one small thing we need from you. This says that we have budget stuff, but I'm not going to cover that till next week. It's just still in here, and I'm too lazy to take it out. All right. So, as an introduction, we just wanted to show you what we've all been up to. We held 6 different department worksite meetings that I know of. We held 2 of our weekly steward meetings. We spent 4 hours that I know of examining departmental safety plans. We submitted 4 formal requests for information to HR. We examined 2 contracting out requests in the county. We spent at least 2 hours on outreach. We met with department management for a combined total of 14 hours, and we met with HR management for a combined total of 9 hours. We attended 3 political education conferences because it's going to be a big year, and then meetings included our chapter officers' monthly meeting, our Sonoma County Coalition of Labor Organizations meeting, several discipline meetings and grievances as well. And then, of course, we outlined our next steps. So, believe it or not, this leaves out quite a bit, including the amount of time that we've spent on individual worksite concerns through steward and other advocate assistants. It also leaves out just many miscellaneous meetings that we've attended. I just wanted to put this out there because union involvement may be feverish and we may be just flying, but it's a quiet thing. If you're not personally involved in it, you probably aren't seeing that it's even happening. Why would you? So I just wanted to highlight this snapshot to remind you of the amount of work being done by your elected officers and a great handful of your incredible member leaders. So there are 3 prongs to our most recent talks with county HR management. Our conversations immediately prior to the mass lobby reopenings that took place on Monday, July 6th, our return to existing proposals, and the handful of new HR management activities we're looking to examine. All right. So if you recall from my last video 2 weeks ago, member leadership all over the county compiled this long list of questions for department management at each of the work sites whose lobbies reopened last Monday. To recap, we told the county we needed to speak to each of the managers in question, and the county obliged. They arranged for management to join us in an all-day marathon meeting where we cycled them in and out for each work site. So this marathon occurred on the Thursday before many of our lobbies reopened. Our demand for these conversations did not serve as an approval of this decision, nor did it serve as a conclusion of the conversation. It was just the quickest way for us to ensure that we had a baseline of information for each site and to help us identify any problematic or dangerous environments before the public began to re-enter our buildings. As you can imagine, we learned a lot. For me, the 2 biggest takeaways that I got from this day-long meeting were, number 1, the everlasting power struggle between county management and department management. They contradicted each other. They contradicted themselves. We lost count at how many times each party had to put themselves in check when responding to the other's communication. I am not mentioning any of this to be catty. This is just a legitimate dynamic that exists naturally in our kind of government structure. No one party can be called out for it. It's built in. I'm mentioning it because it's something we all need to remember when contemplating how decisions and policies arise when 2 parties must collaborate. And my second takeaway was in the same vein. Putting aside all of the obvious reasons why each department is unique when it comes to its physical layout, its function, its manner of public services, its size, its budget, acknowledging all of the obvious, we were really provided proof of how differently management operates in each department. They conduct themselves very differently when it comes to what they prioritize, the manner in which they advocate for their workforce, their amount of involvement and knowledge of what's going on at their staff's front lines, their acknowledgement of basic broad sweeping labor law, worksite safety law, and even countywide HR policies. Some department directors told us exactly what we expected to hear from them, while others really did surprise us in their disregard for their staff, or in some cases, their protection and their reverence for their staff. This is obviously a public and recorded message, so if you'd like to hear specifics, or you would like me to name names, I'd happily provide that for you in my next countywide worksite meeting. Again, that's going to be provided later in this video on how to hook up with that. I will provide, though, I've got to do it, a special shout out to the management at Agricultural Preservation and Open Space on Mendocino Avenue. I acknowledge that in some ways they do have it easier or better off than some of the larger and more human service-oriented departments, in meaning that they're not subject to the same physical contact requirements as other departments. Do not make any mistake, though. In spite of that, their detailed attention to safety and their overall description of long-term priorities was refreshing, affirming, and, in my opinion, should serve as a best practice for other county departments to follow. I'm really, really impressed. And before I even had the opportunity to have a conversation with them about it, their own employees have said the same thing about them. So what the employees said about them ahead of time, it was really confirmed once we got together with them in the meeting. I just want to give them a special props. So all of that said, I'll remind you that as union leaders, we're not in agreement that it's necessary for most of our lobbies to reopen at this time. We make sure that county management is reminded of that regularly. So again, being involved in this is something we needed to do for the sake of safety for our members, so we knew what the heck was going on everywhere. It was not our involvement didn't mean that this conversation was concluded, like I mentioned before, and our involvement certainly didn't mean that we were consenting to what was happening. So there's a good handful of loose ends that we're still monitoring, as you can imagine. A few key work sites still aren't open to the public, including the CDC and most Department of Public Health lobbies. So we'll be meeting with their management prior to their planned opening dates once those are determined. But I think it's still up in the air, at least on a public basis. So are you worried that we may have missed something about your work site or have new issues sprung up now that your lobby's back open? It's never too late to get a hold of your steward or your local leader or us so we can address it. So please do that whenever this happens for you. It's what our union is for. Okay. So existing proposals and negotiation news. We explained this in the last video, but I'm going to recap it quickly just so everyone's up to speed on what I'm talking about. When they shut down DPNW, that stands for Disaster Paid Not Worked status, when they shut it down effective June 15th, the county presented us with this side letter that you see here. And to remind you of what the definition of a side letter is, a side letter or a side agreement is a collective bargaining agreement that's not part of our existing contract or MOU, in which this letter, both parties to this contract, in this case the union and the county, both parties use this side letter to reach an agreement on issues that our MOU doesn't cover, or to clarify issues in the contract, or to modify the MOU permanently or temporarily. So in this side letter, the county was offering to modify our contract, our MOU, for a temporary basis that would expire on December 31st of this year. And the side letter would modify our contract in two ways. First, it quote-unquote provides an alternative to DPNW. Remember, the Disaster Paid Not Worked, or DPNW, is the leave that we once had for folks who had no place to report to work and could not telework, either due to technological reasons, like not having a reliable internet connection, or being at a department that just still had insufficiently prepared itself for emergencies, or maybe just because their job duties couldn't be done that way. DPNW was heavily used by employees all over the county for the duration of our closures, and it was the only thing preventing many people from going on leave without pay status, which would have halted their wages, their benefits, and of course any contributions to their benefits, including their pensions. So if we were to sign this letter, it would be agreeing firstly to the county's decision to end DPNW, which they've already done, but we'd be agreeing to it. And we'd also be agreeing that it's okay for employees to be quote unquote granted the permission to instead use their regular sick time accruals for any future time they used that used to be covered by DPNW. So for any reason, any point between now and the end of the year that folks would have normally qualified for DPNW because they were unable to report to work, they are now quote unquote being allowed to use their sick time for that. So again, the side letter states that both signing parties are cool with DPNW ending, and that by doing so, employees were instead permitted to use their standard regular sick time accruals for any time that once used to qualify as DPNW leave. So our first reaction to this was the acknowledgement that DPNW was already taken away from us, outside of our control. But signing this was essentially kind of signing on with being cool with that decision until the end of the year. That's obviously sucky. Our second feeling was acknowledging that if and when any remaining employees were stuck in this position where they would have to utilize their own accruals to cover time in which they had no way to perform work, that's exactly what they'd already be doing. How would providing permission to use our own accruals when needed, be a gift beyond the words on paper. So our whole concern surrounding the end of DPNW is the very real fact that folks are now going to be forced to use their own accruals. So signing a letter that says that you're allowed to do that is kind of like knocking on the Donner Party's cabin door with a side letter, telling them that once they run out of food, they would then be allowed to eat their own shoe leather. They're going to boil and eat their own shoes if they have to, regardless of whether they agree to sign your stupid letter, no? So we couldn't rightly make a final decision a couple weeks back when we were presented this because the county, until the county clarified what they meant in the language. So if you see here, the letter stipulates both parties agree to killing DPNW for the duration of, quote, the COVID-19 public health emergency. All right. So when we last met over this and I asked them to clarify what the emergency meant, because it could mean many things, they told us they didn't know and that they would get back to us. So last Thursday, instead of immediately just kind of giving me a straight answer, I'm just going to say it. They waffled for a bit. They attempted to gaslight me for having the audacity to want this definition. They told me that they didn't quite understand what I meant by asking it. They asked me to clarify my question several different ways. And again, this is something that we'd asked and they said they'd get back to us on several weeks ago. So all of a sudden they don't understand the question when we're meeting again. So, okay, that's cute. When I was finally kind of forced to give them an example of why this lack of clarity will be an issue, they finally told us that the DPNW removal would be for the duration of the current Sonoma County Board of Supervisors declared emergency. Okay, so not the state, not the feds, and not tied to the public health orders. That helps a lot. It's good to know. So with that, I was naturally led to my second question that had been sitting there on deck. What if any of our employees, what if any of their options to perform their work are again removed before the SOUP's currently declared emergency is lifted? So what then when our members' work sites reclose, or their department no longer enables them to telework, or any of the contingencies that may take place as COVID cases continue to climb in our county? Well, apparently I'm a real pain in the behind for conjuring up that possibility. After wading through more gaslighting and more wasted time arguing, I finally received the county's answer of, quote, I'm not quite sure I'm getting the point or how to respond. That's what I received from them. So easy enough then, conversation over, right? Just to cover the second half of this letter, the second supposed gift provided to us in this spectacular letter was for parents who deplete all of their federal CARES Act leave. That's that EPSL and EFMLEA. Time that they're forced to utilize, right? Because their children are home without childcare or school to attend. The county's side letter purports to, quote, gift these parents with the ability to use their own accrued sick leave hours if they don't have telework available to them in some capacity. So forget the fact that this is the Donner Party all over again, where parents in this position will already kind of be forced to take their own personal leave accruals once they get to this point. No actual gift is occurring here. What's even more egregious is that the county has gone out of their way to acknowledge on this slide letter that those of us who are parents of minor children are going to be soon faced with this specific dilemma: a lack of childcare and vastly changed school scheduling as a result of the pandemic. Acknowledging this problem, and instead of being proactive or creative to address the inevitable productivity concern, forget any humanitarian reasoning, the inevitable lessened productivity when mass numbers of parents are stuck using sick or vacation hours because there's no one to watch their kids, instead of being proactive in the face of this PR and financial concern for county management, the county decides to present this. It honestly would make more sense to me for them to just ignore this looming issue. That's just easier. But to acknowledge that it's coming and offer this is just really just strange. So this topic is going to continue in a bit once I get to our union's new inquiries to county management. But first, one more update on our existing proposals. Our union's latest proposal to the county was our existing telework proposal, fully reworked. We had presented it to them 2 weeks prior. This was before our lobby reentry meeting, so they had 2 weeks to prepare a response. So, simplified, our demands to the county are that they institute a permanent telework policy to ensure safety and continuity of operations. We're asking them to follow the public health order, the spirit of it. Those who can work from home should. We're asking them to reclaim the authority from individual departments when it comes to usage of telework, and that for their sake, they accept our offer to help get the document off the ground. Here's the county's response. That they addressed this a couple weeks ago, that their response is fairly consistent with what we've been saying all along during this meet and confer, that they're interested in the permanent development of a telework guideline, and that's part of why we were able to implement a temporary guideline so quickly, because it was something that had been in the minds of county managers. We don't have time. We're not obligated. It's not feasible. You're not showing a negative impact of our temporary policy. But hold on a second. They said that they were able to implement a temporary guideline as quickly as they did because it was something that had been in the minds of county managers. Record scratch on this piece. County HR explicitly told us early on in this meet and confer process that department management was disinterested overall in a permanent telework policy. I wrote that verbatim in my notes. HR told us with an air of frustration even that they were unable to put together something permanent because their interest wasn't matched with our departments. Now they're telling us that department management was indeed interested, and that's why they were able to distribute their temporary guidelines so quickly, because they'd already begun to work on it prior to COVID. So that's not very helpful. We're not even sure what to believe on this one. I'm not even offended by mistruths in these meetings. What bothers me is the wasted time and the veiling of accurate information. So, continuing on, the remainder of the county's response to our permanent telework policy proposal. They don't feel it's feasible to implement a major county program at this point in time. That the temporary telework guidelines provide the possibility to provide services made possible in operations until we're able to meet and confer on a permanent policy. And lastly, the county will not agree to meet and confer over permanent telework guidelines until we can identify any impact from their temporary guidelines. Stay awake. We're getting through this. Please know that for this, we do have next steps in place. I look forward to providing you with our next update on it. But that's what's going on right now. All right. Wring out your hands, blink your eyes a few times, take a deep breath, clear out your brain. Pause this if you have to. After this, I'll be sharing the new inquiries that we put forth to the county. We'll begin in 10 seconds. Welcome back. So we presented 4 new inquiries to the county, but before we get into them, the county told us ahead of time that they, quote, don't wish to meet and confer over these 4 topics. What that means is that they don't feel legally obligated to be held responsible for the fact that these concerns exist, because from their perspective, the concerns exist for reasons other than decisions that the county has made in response to the pandemic. So they don't wish to meet and confer over these topics, but as an act of kindness, they'll allow us to discuss the topics. So we took them on that and decided to discuss them. The county said overall, before I get into them, when it comes to whatever prospective decisions that the county may make, they don't have any obligation to talk to us about them. They also mentioned they don't really have fully developed answers for us for any of these 4, and that they just haven't had an opportunity to review these extensively with leadership. But again, we can talk about them further next week when they have more time to think about the questions. I'm just letting you know that ahead of time in case you feel that any of the following answers of these 4 just fall flat. They need more time on it. So question number 1 of 4. When it comes to our workforce, what is the CAO's plan for the following scenarios? And just to recap, the CAO is the county administrative officer, Cheryl Bratton. She's the top of the pyramid. Okay, so what is the CAO's plan for the following scenarios for our workforce? The scenario where Sonoma County is placed on the state's coronavirus watch list of infection and hospitalization rates. Keep in mind, our meeting took place the day before we ended up landing on this watch list. And what about the following scenario where Sonoma County receives a second round of state-mandated closures? Closures as in closures of our own offices, county buildings. So here's what the county had to say on this on Thursday. First thing they said, they've got no plans or conversations occurring on this at all. So if we were to end up on the watch list, a change in the public health order would occur. Again, this is what they're telling us. HR at the time was unaware of any anticipated change that would impact county operations, but that's because county management doesn't always get advance notice from the public health officer. County HR typically tends to see public health order updates when everyone else sees them. They're not privy or involved in the creation of them. It's not their job. So although the public health office is a county entity, HR doesn't often get the information, and public health office rarely communicates with county management beforehand, and definitely not with HR. And that makes sense. We've seen, when I say we, I mean in general, this is part of their answer from HR. You see two different approaches from other counties who've been placed on the state watch list. The first is when the county's public health officers will update their county's public health order to kind of pull back on public gatherings, essentially adding back some existing restrictions. The other thing we've seen in these counties is that the state just directly orders implementation. So in either of these cases, it may or may not include closure of county buildings. It would depend on the severity of the order. So since this meeting on last Thursday, Sonoma County, like I mentioned before, has been placed on the state watch list, but no changes have been required surrounding government offices in our new public health order. So the county, the most they could tell us at the time was that if our health officer indeed does put out a new order that requires changes to our workplace, the county will respond accordingly. Kind of a vague answer, but they're kind of with us on when they find out what's going on, which is a bummer, but that's just how it is. So again, remember the first part of their answer said that they were not having any conversations and plans were not being made for these contingencies. So I kind of asked them again in different words, hey, are any plans being made for these possibilities? They may be hypothetical, but they're not unlikely. I asked, there's no plans, there's no preparation occurring for any next round of closures? And the answer from the HR manager was, quote, not to my knowledge. So their answer continued to say that I was asking, quote, a really broad-based question. That, quote, everyone in this room is all aware, as well as the managers, that this is a fluid situation and we may need to pivot. So this is their answer again. So there are conversations happening. This obviously directly contradicts the first sentence in their response, which is where they told us conversations are not happening. Other things that they had to say was that it's highly unlikely that the county will do what they did in mid-March when they sent most of us home and then figured things out from there. Now that they've got more experience on this type of situation, if we were to have assigned a full-on shutdown, they would obviously do it a bit differently. They'd still be sending more people home than we have in the workplace now. It would just depend on what's needed. So I'll come back on this next week. When we talk about this, I'll keep you updated. The second question for county management, with this, we return back to the parent-child conversation. So here's our actual inquiry. Employees who have school-aged children are facing intermittent school schedules that, when they're unable to secure childcare, will require telework or time away from work. This scenario will be with us until at least next June, and childcare has proven very difficult to find due to the pandemic. The county is facing decreased productivity and a large amount of workers on unpaid leave status, so we need to plan for this now. So the questions are, where is the CAO and county management on this process? Will telework options be expanded where feasible? Will different shifts, for example, swing shifts, evening shifts, weekend shifts, become available where this is feasible? And then will the county consider providing temporary childcare on county campuses to ensure that parents can continue to work? So this problem overall is legitimate. It's certainly not hypothetical. It can't be ignored. Sonoma County has over 40 school districts, and they're all tasked with making their own individual scheduling decisions. It's a real rat shit. I just cannot even believe it. I'm so glad I don't have kids for this reason. I really feel for those of you having to deal with this. Many schools are leaning toward having 1 week on, 1 week off. Some toward partial days and incomplete weeks, where schools will have their students telelearn at home part of the time. Some schools are pushing toward 100% distance learning. Teachers' unions overall are pushing back on reentry. They even held a car caravan outside of the Office of Education. Teachers are obviously pushing for full-time telelearning for the most part, for obvious safety reasons. However, childcare was working around here before COVID-19 certainly isn't how things are now. Child care providers are pulling back. There's plenty of places who've closed or who've just, slowed down or shrunken their operations. Some parents don't know where to send their kids anymore. Not all parents currently have the correct telework infrastructure in place, right? And their accruals are going to run out quick style. At a minimum, we have an entire school year in which we're going to have to deal with this. We're collectively under the impression that we're going to be placed in some crises where it comes to productivity and unpaid leave. So here's the county's actual response on this. They're keeping an eye out on the state and the feds to see what they're doing, because it was, the federal Family Cares, the CARES Act law, FFCRA. They know that this is happening across the country, this child care crisis and school closure crisis. So they're trying to see whether there's going to be any change with FFCRA law, or if even California is going to do anything on their own, because California is known to be like that. The county does not anticipate providing child care. Now, this should not serve as a surprise. Putting together child care is extremely complicated. There's huge liability issues. There's all sorts of licensing you have to go through. It's very difficult, even in non-pandemic times. So that was lofty, but it was worth asking, right? So that's not been part of the conversation at the point, but the conversation is happening. The county's not been considering different shifts, but it's certainly something they said that they could float out to see if there's any interest from management in exploring this. It obviously wouldn't make sense with all jobs, but plenty of jobs around the county would be able to institute, at least temporarily, different shifts. And again, these are for emergency scenarios. This isn't just, hey, look at this, take a look at this calendar, work when you want. This is for emergencies, for actual parents being stuck without a choice. So the folks at HR told us that a number of departments are already working with their folks who have childcare issues, and they have been all along, and I'm sure that's true. But they said they can't say that that's working out well in every position. They want to take this back to leadership and continue some conversations and then detail some of the perspective that we provided to them. So that was very promising. And you know why? Because they know that this is happening, because they've got kids too, right? So our reply to them was, don't forget, just keep your minds open, right? What about contracting with the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club, where there's no out-of-pocket county expense? The facilities are already there. This needs to be discussed relatively soon, because many parents are coming up on school district openings in July and August. It's kind of why we're pushing the telework as much as possible, because it's going to help a lot of parents be able to work a swing or night shift if they're home with their kids all day. We reminded them that it's not just SEIU members who are affected by this. Management is probably encountering the same issue. HR came back with, oh yeah, plenty of our managers have already voiced this as a concern. So unfortunately for that reason, but fortunately for us, they're taking it seriously, right? We finished this up by warning them that these conversations need to happen ASAP, and they need to happen between every department manager and their respective workforce, because there's too many variables for county management as a whole to tackle this alone. This is one thing where delegation is going to be required. But we will need the blessing of the board and the CAO so HR can start reaching out to department heads to instruct them to be as flexible as they can, including talking about other types of shifts. Okay, let's go to the third one. What is the CAO's plan for a permanent telework policy for crises such as the coronavirus pandemic? Now, I know this is deja vu because we've been talking about telework this whole damn video. But just to hit it home, since 2017, our county has either been in a crisis or we're just coming out of a crisis or just about to head into another crisis. We're going on 4 years without getting a permanent telework policy off the ground. We'd already spoken quite a bit about permanent telework policies, but with this question, here's what the county had to say in response. They wanted to make sure that we understood that telework is not going to work for every job. Absolutely. Kind of hard to be in parking enforcement and writing up tickets from home. You know, there's so many different jobs we could say this about. I don't need to explain. You know better than me in a lot of circumstances what types of jobs will and won't work with telework. And they also wanted us to know any proposal that they develop would strictly just be guidelines. And it would be up to departments to adopt or not adopt the guidelines. It would be up to county HR or the CAO or the board to, again, take back this authority countywide. And frankly speaking, I don't know if there's any precedence elsewhere with that. It's something we should look into because, again, there is a major power struggle between HR/county management overall and then department management. So this isn't me giving up. I'm just, we got to illustrate the reality around us accurately. So we replied to them with, again, letting them know that the county needs to acknowledge that from department to department, and even internally in most departments, employees are being subjected to clear inequities when it comes to telework opportunities. So the county came back and said that they'd take our messages back to the board and the CAO. Our last question for them was about racial equity. And I really want to give a shout out to the folks who have come to me with this. One person in particular, because some of this verbiage is partially lifted from a letter that they sent to Linda Hopkins. I really want to shout out, but for some reason, I just want to make sure that it's okay with them that I do. So I will in the next video once I get their permission. So the question is the county working to address and prevent ethnic exposure disparities in the workforce? COVID-19 has exploded disproportionately in our Latinx population, and the same environmental factors also exist in our own workforce, right? Latinx county workers are more likely to be exposed to the public than white workers, and the reverse is true for upper management positions. People of color are more likely to be employed in frontline staff positions and are therefore being put at a greater risk compared to our, statistically speaking, mostly white management who could work behind closed doors and from home. So nobody can disagree with the fact that there are exposure disparities. They are institutional. It's not a coincidence. This was, again, like I mentioned before, righteously brought up to us from quite a few members. And even if the county is unconcerned with any moral implications on this, perhaps we can appeal to their fear of potential liability. Whatever works. The county remained silent on this one when we brought it up. I know, let me just give you a minute to get your jaw off the floor. I know that's a huge surprise. We're hoping that this additional week will provide them with some ability to further digest our inquiry. We'd like to hear what they have to say. I know that they're going to be really tiptoeing around this one for all sorts of reasons. Let me conclude this section by saying this. Future closures, parents with dependent children, a permanent telework policy, and the whole host of inequities that run through our workforce. Again, closures, parents, telework, inequity. Not only are all of these related, but these pieces all directly affect the county's productivity and baseline functionality. It affects the public we serve, the services we provide, and the mental and physical health of the public and our workforce. So It's going to benefit all of us more significantly than the county may realize until they join us in agreeing that these concerns are legitimate and that action is needed. So again, once they join us in agreeing that these issues are there and that we need to do something about it, I hope that they understand how much it's going to benefit all of us. It's incredible the butterfly effect this is going to have. All right. Please hold yourselves to a realistic and respectful reaction to this news for the few of you who might still be unaware. Our largest department, Human Services, with a good 920 employees, has reported at least one positive coronavirus test among their employees. If this is brand new information to you, consider yourself fortunate. If you weren't personally approached by management about a positive case, consider yourself fortunate. The county, to the extent that we know, has followed protocols so far in ensuring that all necessary employees have been notified. And anyone who's had contact with the positive case, again, from everything we've been able to obtain, they have all been identified and they've all been contacted. Thankfully, we already work with people who are working as contact tracers, so we've got a nice inside look at what's going on in that case. The reason that I'm gently reminding you to remain realistic is because in the case that anyone hearing this is surprised, that's frankly a ridiculous position to hold. I'm so sorry if that's insensitive to say. I don't think any of us are surprised. I'd like to think that most of us knew that this was coming. That doesn't mean that this is okay. Please do not get me wrong. It can't be avoided. Between our current public health order, the county's decision to fill their buildings with more and more employees and now members of the public, the positive cases that have been reported so far with employees have, according to them, been traced to contraction outside of the workplace due to the folks that they've determined who've been positive. I really do need to refrain from editorializing here because I know your time is valuable. So instead, I'm just going to tell you that we'll keep you updated. But again, this shouldn't act as any kind of surprise to any of us because of the decisions that the county's made. And I'm not saying that because I don't want anyone not to be outraged. I'm just saying I know how you feel because I feel the same way. I'll just put it that way. Okay. All right. So at the beginning of this video, I announced that I'm probably not going to have the time for the foreseeable future to create actual slides and an actual script for these videos. I'm literally reading most of this because I don't have the mental capacity or the energy to do this on the fly. It's usually pretty heavily scripted, so I make sure I don't forget anything that I want to tell you. So moving forward, our videos are going to be a little more haphazard. They're not going to contain many visuals, if anything. It takes an extremely long time to put these together. As I typed this sentence that I'm reading to you right now, I was at over 31 pages of typed information. It's a lot of work. I'm guilting you. I acknowledge this. I'm guilting you for a reason here. I need everyone who can hear me to do one simple thing for me. It's going to take less than 5 minutes of your time, and it's going to pay off in several ways. Let's get this. Check your email in the next 24 hours or so. That means by the end of Tuesday. It's going to contain an email from me, and that email is going to have a bunch of talking points about reentry. It's going to have a list of 5 email addresses of the different county supervisors. It's going to include easy instructions on what to do. All the work has been done. All you have to do is take a look at all those talking points and throw together the ones that resonate most with you. And ideally, if you can, throw in a couple of extra sentences that include your own story. For example, my name is Mark. I work at employment and training at Human Services. My wife just had a baby, and our baby was in the NICU. Or maybe our baby wasn't in the NICU, but we've encountered exposures, or I'm scared to go home and cuddle my baby because I've had, exposure to the public. All of these things are actually extremely important for the Board of Supervisors to hear. And the reason why is because they actually respond to human interest far more than they respond to facts and figures. I'll get back to that in a second. Forward your email that you send them. Forward it to me after it's sent. What's the point? Each email that you send them and you send to me is going to enter you into my contest, and it's a really nice contest. It says 25 prizes here, but there's actually more now. The prizes include cash and gift cards. This is not union swag. Not that I'm against union swag, but I want you to remain super invested in this, right? So gift cards to local businesses, more than one, cash prizes. The point of this is to inundate the Board of Supervisors with communication from the workforce about safety, okay? So it's extremely important for our cause that as many of us as possible participate in this in the next 48 hours, please. You don't have to write any of these email addresses down because they're going to be in the email that you get, but they're here if you need them. This is just an illustration of who your supervisor is. So, for example, if you live in Cloverdale, Geyserville, Healdsburg, Windsor, you're probably James Gore. If you live in downtown Santa Rosa or certain parts of Roanoke Park, you might have Shirley Zane. Sonoma's Susan Gorin. Petaluma's David Rabbit. Or if you are in the elite squad like I am, Linda Hopkins is your supervisor because you live in West County. During this time of COVID spikes, during our employees who are testing positive, during the county's overall difficulties adjusting to our reality, we're just overdue in communicating this directly to our board. Make no mistake. What your union leadership is working so hard to communicate in our meetings with HR is not trickling up the way that we are told that it is. The only time that we've ever gotten anything of any substance or value done in the time that I've been at the county is when we got tired of the process and cut out the middleman. Please find my email, and it might not be there yet. It'll be there by the end of Tuesday. It's going to arrive shortly in your inbox. Find my email and just follow the basic instructions. It's going to be like a 1, 2, 3. Not only will you be entered into my contest if you forward me what you've sent, but your email will get us closer to getting our supervisors to provide a county HR with instructions to cooperate with us as a workforce. The power, I'm telling you, it is in your hands. Email them as soon as possible, then forward it to me. I truly cannot thank you enough for your help in advance, and you will be rewarded in more ways than one. So thank you very much for doing that. All right, let's do our upcoming events. If you're a steward or member leader, don't forget to join us on Wednesday morning. Immediately afterward will be my lunch worksite meeting. That'll be weekly. And then as you can see, we are kicking off the Board of Supervisors email campaign. I'll explain soon about an important survey I'll be sending you about our potential for instituting state disability insurance. So that'll come in a future episode here. As I mentioned, another lunchtime countywide worksite meeting is coming. The Zoom invitation will arrive by Tuesday via email in an official 10-to-1 communication. And an event has already been scheduled in our Facebook group, so please join us at lunch on Wednesday, even if it's just to listen. Participation's entirely up to you. There's even going to be built-in confidential polls you'll be able to take. So these worksite lunches of mine are weekly. It's going to be every Wednesday at noon. So if you can't join this week, come on in next week. And it's essentially going to be whatever it is you want it to be. You know, everyone's going to be free to ask questions. There's a chat you can type into if you don't want to talk, or you feel like you're, being steamrolled because other people are talking. I'll be here for you. So please take advantage of that. Okay. I will hunt each of you down to ensure that you email your supervisor. Email all 5 of them if you can, but at the very least, just email your own in your own district. Lando here is counting on you to do the right thing. If you won't do it for me, do it for Lando. And again, I hope to see you all this Wednesday at noon. Keep an eye out for the Zoom invite. Until then, hang in there.